Did you know that being able to use storytelling at work is a little bit like having a pet giraffe when everybody else is walking around with a golden retriever? In other words, it makes you unique, makes you memorable, and if you use it well at work, it can have an amazing impact on your career and on your overall performance. There's just one small problem. Most of us don't have a pet giraffe or use storytelling actively at work, and as a result, we often struggle to get our point across, to progress our careers and reach our objectives. Now, my name is Christoffer Wahlberg, and I'm the CEO and founder of Hebla Consulting. Now, I work with top leaders and brands such as Hennessy, Dior, Slush, Sephora, and many, many more to help them create impact through storytelling and better communication. Now, today, what we're going to do is we're going to dive into the wonderful world of business storytelling, and we're going to look at why storytelling is so relevant to use in the workplace, but we're also going to talk about why it's so rare to be used in the first place. Then we're going to talk about what are the concrete steps we can take to become storytelling superstars. But let's start by thinking about what storytelling from a business perspective actually means. Now, when you hear those words, you might start by associating or thinking about a CEO standing on a stage in front of a group of journalists introducing a new piece of technology. Or you might think of a TED Talk, where a woman in a powerful suit stands and shares her life story and talks about her research to a captivated audience. Now, these are, of course, good examples of where we can use storytelling, but to be fair, they're not situations where most of us find ourselves very often. Now I'd like you to think of something a little bit different. Imagine an office building. On the first floor, you have a break room where two colleagues are sitting, drinking Nespresso and talking about their summer holidays. On the second floor, you maybe have a young executive getting ready to present to a group full of top-level leadership, and he's feeling nervous and anxious, and he knows that he's not going to get their attention, and they're probably just going to be on their laptops through most of the presentation. Or you might picture yourself sitting in a meeting room together with management and debating whether or not to make an obvious comment on something that you know would help, but you're not really sure on how to present it. Now, these are very realistic scenarios where storytelling can help. So in this sense, I'd like you to think of storytelling much more as a beehive. In business life, everywhere you look, there are hundreds of people communicating, buzzing, trying to get their point across. And in most cases, we're failing. So what is storytelling? Well, we're going to talk about that in a moment, but before we dive into it, I'll share with you a little bit about my own background and how I ended up working with storytelling and being so passionate about it. So let me start by asking you a question. Do you like champagne? Well, I was about 10 years old when I fell in love with champagne. Now, I know what you're thinking. I didn't drink champagne when I was about 10 years old. I had to wait, of course, like everybody else, until I was about 12 in Finland. But when I was around 10, I saw something that changed my life. Now, I grew up in a very academic family, and it was a little bit boring. But I remember always having these summer parties, and my grandfather would come, he would pop open a bottle of champagne, and somehow the entire mood would change. People would start dancing, drinking, smiling, partying, and behaving almost like children. And I was always fascinated by this. So I decided that one day I'll be working for a champagne house. So you can imagine how excited I was when about 8 years ago my dreams came true. And I was hired by Krug Champagne, which is probably the most prestigious champagne house in the world, as their first ever head of education and training. Now there I was given a mission. I was asked to present to Maggie Henriquez, the CEO, how I would enhance the sales through education and training. And I remember being really nervous for this presentation. But I got ready, and then I stepped up on stage, which was just a dark, musty boardroom, and I started to present. And in the middle of my presentation, I heard a slap. And I looked up, and it was Maggie, who had hit the table. She stood up and said, "Your presentation is probably one of the worst things I've seen. It's boring, you're way too technical, you don't show any emotions, and don't you know that people don't buy products, they buy emotions." And so basically I realized quite shortly that I had two options. Can you guess what those were? Get better or get out. Now, honestly, for a while it took me maybe a few months to get on board with the idea that she was right, but eventually when I did, I realized I had to change. My communication was boring, it was dry, it didn't have any sense of excitement to it, and I really needed to find a new way of developing myself. In came storytelling. Now, what I did was I started to study as much as I could about storytelling, and I started to develop my own techniques, my own tools, and eventually Maggie got excited about this transformation and she supported me to help others. Eventually, I launched my own company, Hebla Consulting, about 5 years ago with the help of Maggie's support, and since then I've been very fortunate in being able to help some of the leading brands of the world to help their own communication grow. So, the first question we should probably ask ourselves is, what does storytelling do? Why is it so relevant? Well, the simple answer to that is storytelling helps us create emotions. The reason why that is important is that a relatively large part of the human decision-making and experience totality is made based on emotions. Can you guess how many of our decisions in general are made based on emotions? It's in general between 80 and 95%, which is absolutely incredible. And when I realized this as a former salesperson, I just understood that I had been wasting opportunities basically my whole career. Most of the times I didn't use storytelling to talk to my clients, I didn't use it as part of my job interviews, I didn't use it in my performance reviews with my boss, I didn't use it when interacting with my colleagues. In most cases, what I did was what all of us does, is I talked about two things. I talked about the features of something and then the benefits of it. So if you're selling something, you would describe the product first, what it's made of, the material, so forth. And then later on, as you maybe get a little bit better as a salesperson, you learn how to describe the benefit of those features to the client. But that's not really emotional at all. So when I realized this, I got really excited about it and I wanted to understand more. So what I did was I dove into a little bit more the history of storytelling and communication, and I discovered something quite interesting. Now, if you go back thousands of years, storytelling has been the main way that we've communicated. We've used it as a form to inspire, as a way to educate, and as a way to drive action and pull people in. However, about 500 years ago, something happened that started to change all of that, and our ability to tell stories verbally started to disappear. And that happened pretty much because of this gentleman here. And this, as some of you might guess, was Gutenberg. And what's he famous for? Well, for inventing the printing press. So what did he do? Well, basically, he made books and reading available to everybody. And so the idea, the concept of sharing a story verbally was no longer as relevant as it once was. So over the years that came, over the past hundreds or so years, we still love stories, we still react to them, it's just our sharing capabilities that have been greatly diminished. Now, as a result of that, unfortunately, we tend to communicate with each other a little bit like we were robots or computers. And the result of this is that a lot of the information we share goes in one ear and comes out the other. Let me give you an example of this. So in 2009, two journalists were discussing this very issue. They wanted to understand how much value storytelling can bring from a communication perspective. So what they did was they decided to do an experiment. They went around New York and they gathered from thrift stores and flea markets over 100 items, which are examples like an empty mayonnaise jar, broken toys, empty envelopes, and so forth and so forth. And they place these basically worthless items on eBay for sale. However, maybe you can guess it, but with each item they had a writer, an author, write a compelling story, an origin story for that product. Now the question to you is, how many percent of value increase do you think those products went through in the few months it took to sell everything off? Now, originally, everything started costing around $150–200. The question to you is, how many percent of value did increase after those few months? The answer is 2,700%, which is absolutely crazy, right? Especially considering that they wrote down that these stories aren't true at the end, so they weren't lying to people. But this research, which was published, then sort of sparked what I like to call the golden age or the gold rush of storytelling. And suddenly you had some of the leading brands all around the world saying that we need to use storytelling as part of our communication. And suddenly, without really stopping to ask themselves what storytelling is, many brands started saying that they have great storytelling in their brand logo. They started to say that their customer journey tells a story. They started to say their website tells a story. Their Instagram tells a story. But the problem with that was, again, nobody stopped to really think about what a story is, where they come from, and how do you use them in an effective way in order to get those results. So let's start by thinking about you and how you can use storytelling techniques to improve your own life, your own career, and even your own personal relationships. And the first thing you have to do is realize where stories come from. Simply put, there's three main categories of stories you can use to your disposal. First of all, you have business stories. These can be, for instance, something that has happened to your company or to your colleagues within that company that you then can relate to as an example. It can be historical, so something globally historical or from the, let's say, the founding of your company, something going back much, much longer in history. Or it can be personal, so something you've experienced yourself. And out of all of these, the personal storytelling is probably the easiest to start with. The next question I'd like you to ask is where can we use storytelling? Okay, so there's many options here. One option, for instance, is you can use storytelling when introducing yourself. Let's say you have a new manager and you want to give a good impression. That's a great opportunity to start using it. Or let's say you have somebody in a conflict with somebody else and for some reason you are in the middle of that. You can use storytelling to help coach the situation and resolve it. Or what about you have a new colleague, somebody's just joined the team, the boss asks you to get them on board to the company culture, great opportunity. And again, let's imagine you are in a situation where you want to give some advice or some input to a leader in the company in a nice way that encourages them. Beautiful way and beautiful place to use storytelling. However, it's really important to realize that beyond just having an understanding of scenarios where you can use stories, it's also really important to understand what the messages are that we want to convey with these stories. So again, if we take those same three examples, and we say, for instance, all right, so let's start by introducing yourself. What could be an example of a message you want to pass there? It could be, for instance, what to expect from you as a colleague. For conflict resolution, it could be what will happen if we don't solve this issue. For onboarding a new hire, it could be what to expect from the company culture. And for giving advice to a leader, it could be what you would suggest doing in this situation and why. Now, what I recommend that you do is to start by writing down 3 different situations, 3 different scenarios that would benefit you to use storytelling. Then write down the message for those scenarios, what you're trying to accomplish with these situations, and then you're ready to start working on your first personal stories. So, what is storytelling? Well, there's many different interpretations of the subject, and often we honestly confuse between anecdotes, between metaphors, between stories, between whatever it is that we use. But I'm going to give you a simple tool now that you can use to just structure the very basic form of stories. And I call it HOPE. So let's see if you can guess what HOPE stands for. And again, HOPE is a list of ingredients that should help you create an even better story. So it's not everything you need to have in a story, but it's the main characteristics, the main ingredients. So let's see, every good story should start with a likable H for hero. And do we like heroes that have nothing to do, that sit on their couch and eat ice cream, or do we want them to have a clear O for objective? Good. And do we like it when these objectives are easily reached, or do we want there to be some P's along the way? Problems. Well done. And when you overcome those P's, you reach a satisfying ending. Wonderful. So HOPE stands for a hero that is likable, that is relatable, an objective, which is something we care about, which feels important, a problem which often seems unfair, and an ending which is satisfying when we overcome it. And when you put all of those together, you can start to build a story. Think of a memory, an experience, something that has happened to you personally in your past. Try to think about the HOPE structure and start putting those pieces together. The next thing that I really want you to consider thinking about is how to turn storytelling into a conversation. Now, this is really important because, to be fair, what I realized eventually was that storytelling is great for doing what we mentioned at the beginning. To pitch a new product, or do a TED Talk, or do a training activity like I'm doing now. But the problem with storytelling when it comes to a business scenario or business setting is that it's often delivered in a monologue, and that's not what we want. In a good situation, we have 2 people building relationships, having a good conversation. And if one of those people are just talking on for 3, 4, 5 minutes around the story, it's not going to be very good, is it? So, what I'd like you to do is to take a moment to think about how do we turn storytelling into a conversation. And the best way to do that, of course, is by asking questions, right? So, what type of questions are there that we could use? Well, for instance, there are rhetorical questions, so things we don't really expect an answer to. There are open-ended questions, questions that allow the participant, the other person, to share their opinion, to maybe think about it and join the conversation really. And then you have closed-ended questions, which of course are yes or no questions. Now, finally, once you've started to build your own stories, take a moment to write down a few questions that you could use in these situations, and think about questions that you could place into those. All right? So, with that being said, I wish you the best of luck on your storytelling journey. If you want to reach out to me, you can find me on LinkedIn, and good luck with everything, and hope to hear from you at some point. Take care. Bye.